Hi, my name is Carol Torres. Soy puertorriqueña. Nací en Puerto Rico desde el 94. Viví en Puerto Rico hasta los 17, 18 años. Después de eso decidí que quería una carrera en media or game. No, todavía no estaba muy decidida, pero I wanted to make stories. I wanted to make like digital experiences. So I decided to go to this college called Ringling College. I entered as an animation student. And after I think it was after I played a game called Journey, and just seeing how impactful that was for me, I decided to make the switch at the end of my first year to game art, because I really wanted to get something more interactive out of the mediums that I worked out of. And I think that was what really drove me to just kind of pursue game art firstly. I wanted that interaction, and I didn't want like a passive audience in my work, I guess. So I worked there for 4 years. I studied there for 4 years, my bachelor's degrees. During my bachelor's, I think on my sophomore year, I volunteered at GDC, which was, I think, one of the most important things I did in my career. That opened an incredible amount of doors. I learned so much about so many different people. Like, started showing me things out of the academic environment, like how recruiting actually works, how you actually start getting to know people in the industry. And that's one of the things that hopefully I'd like to elaborate, because that's one of the most pivotal points for just getting into the industry, networking and getting to know people. So in my sophomore year, I volunteered at GDC, and it was an incredible experience. Kept on working on my game art career. And as I was working on that career, every year I would go to GDC. The second year I went as a GDC scholar, like an Intel IDDA scholar. That was an incredible opportunity and an incredible experience. I got to meet with so many incredibly smart young women and just really inspirational people that really shaped my career as I was developing as a game artist. And luckily, during my senior year, my application was pretty traditional. Like, I applied to a studio and I got a response back, and they were interested, and it was great. But I do want to harp back, if anyone goes back on this video, how making connections in GDC was so vital and so important, because I did get a chance to meet these recruiters in person. I got to put like a face to my name, and I got to know people that were working in AAA studios at that point. So I could not only I could start learning the culture of like AAA games, but also understand like what their expectations are. And that's sometimes kind of hard to do when you're stuck in like an academical environment, or it's kind of tough to do as you're like developing your skills, developing that flexibility of being able to see your work as a product and as a service that you're indefinitely going to be giving over to a studio or a partner to develop whatever game you're going to be working on. So after, in my senior year, I applied to Insomniac Games, and I got accepted for this position, which was an associate environment artist / outsourcing reviewer. And what they liked about my portfolio, and I'll say this straight out, and I do little tidbit here. I'm just going to put a disclaimer that what I'm saying in this talk, I'm only speaking from my experience. I can only really speak to what helped me get into the industry, but it's not the only way to do it. It's not that I'm saying that this is the only way and the right way of doing things. It's more like I'm just looking to share my experience, and whatever you guys can grab out of that, I hope you can use it as a tool in your own journey, if that makes sense. But so when I applied to Insomniac, what they liked was, and I'll post my portfolio in a bit on that time, I wasn't the strongest artist in my class. Like I wasn't in like the top tier of like the best artist, but I was definitely someone that would show process and would show a lot of breakdowns. And I would definitely show in my breakdowns that I'm thinking through my decisions, I'm thinking through my designs, how it works, how it's built, how things function, and sometimes even like art direction too. So it's showing this breadth of ideas that it's like oh, you really kind of are thinking, you're not copy pasting something, or you're not just, there's thought into this, and that's something that a developer can appreciate when you show them how you think, because that's important for them as like someone that they're going to be paying. Like they want to see like how you're going to be evolving with your tasks that you're giving in a project. So that's something that they liked. And what was cool about the outsourcing position too was I got to have like a little bit of a bird's eye view of what development was like. So for those of you who don't know, so outsourcing reviewing AAA games, not everything is done in-house, especially for games that are like large, like open world, like Spider-Man was. There is absolutely no time for that to be able to be done in-house. So you obviously have like studios, about outsourcing studios that are contracted sometimes by an intermediate like Sony was, sometimes by the company itself, to do the extra work. So I basically got a bird's eye view. It was the first time that Insomniac was doing outsourcing, I believe. And I got a bird's eye view of like how this pipeline was being developed and was able to contribute to that. So I would see, we had different techniques of optimizing our materials over at Insomniac, and we found a way to be able to communicate that to 7 different vendors, which means 7 different studios over different parts of the world, and see also like what things would fall out of translation. The TLDR, it was a really great position for me to see how a pipeline works from start to finish in different studios, external and internal. And I got to review, I'd say more than 5,000 assets. That includes reviewing like PBR secularity, which is at this point in the game, like that's something, if you're a game artist, you need to know obviously what PBR is, and if you can integrate that into your portfolio, even better. But yeah, integrate a lot of PBR, a lot of material optimizations, texture size usage, texture UV map usage, a lot of things that ended up sharpening my eye a lot, especially when reviewing work. Yeah, so that was my experience mostly at Insomniac. And by the time my contract ended after a 2-year mark, and then a friend from college, actually, like he was an underclassman of mine, but he was working on this project. He couldn't say. He was like, "Hey, so like I know you're coming out of this project, but if you want to check this project, it's a very long term, long work hours, but it's a really cool project, and I think you might like it." And I was like, okay, cool. I ended up applying, and there's interest. And when I head over to the studio, it was, oh, so we're working on the Avatar sequels. And it's like, whoa, okay, that's awesome. That's pretty cool. And that was pretty dope. That was pretty cool. So I pretty much jumped into that because, to be frank, I think when I was 12, I don't know. I ended up seeing the Avatar movie like 3 times when it came out, and I was a huge fan of like the designs of that movie. And I think it was like an interesting opportunity to see just how like feature film differentiates from game development in terms of like the art pipeline, which it's not that much. It's actually, so there's like, if someone's like struggling and looking for work in games, I would suggest also opening their possibilities to previs in film development, because a lot of people are using Unreal now. A lot of people are working, yeah, a lot of people are using Unreal for previs, and even if they're not using Unreal, it might be something kind of similar to a game engine, which you could possibly adapt pretty quickly to it. If it comes down to the wire that you need a job and you need to pay the bills. But it's a really great experience too, because again, it diversifies your experience on how problems are solved in an industry, period. So it's something that I would definitely, don't exclude it from your options. And I've been there for, I'd say, yeah, it's been almost about 2 years. It's been definitely a highlight in my career. I've seen a lot of cool things, and it's much different than game development in the sense that there is stage, and you go on stage and you see what things are happening on stage and how that comes back into the computer. It's more like, I guess, tactile in the sense of like there's stuff happening outside and you can kind of like interact with the space and then bring it back and like work on your computer. And for me, I'm someone who enjoys kind of like having a level of physicality to a work. Like it's always something that if I can, I like working on the computer, but if I can get out of it and kind of see like a real world kind of like scenario, that's really fun for me. So it's been incredibly fun so far, and definitely like enriching for my experience. So that kind of concludes a little bit of my intro, who I am, my journey in my 4 years of this career. So I wanted to open it up to well, preparations and portfolio, ideally for preparations and environment. First of all is one of the things I can't stress enough is like presentation. It's funny because there was, I don't know who of you know Gavin Golden. I think that's his last name, I hope. So Gavin is the lead character artist at Insomniac. And one of the things I would hear him just grind about all day was how he hated Wix, I guess. How he hated like basically any interface that put a lot of barriers between your recruiter seeing your work immediately and or having to load or having to wait. So presentation, make sure that you are presenting your pieces in a way where it's not that much of a hassle for someone to go to. Make sure that that it's accessible on mobile as well as like Windows, and make sure it's like clear and your strongest piece are shown like at the very beginning. At this point, honestly, yeah, ArtStation is a good default to fall into. It's free. It's a well-trusted source. But if you are going the route of making your own website, I would recommend that you find maybe something like Squarespace or something that you can see your images immediately and translates well on mobile. Second of all, it's quality over quantity. So I learned of a really neat quote yesterday, which it's going to contradict this a little bit. So quality can be subjective and quantity is more objective. But in this case, try to put your strongest piece based on the feedback that you've gotten from multiple sources to be able to like assess if that truly is your strongest piece. Put that strongest piece first. And if there are things that have fallen down the cracks or things that are not relevant anymore to your portfolio, eliminate them, because your portfolio is going to be as strong as your weakest piece, basically. So quality over quantity is something that you have to keep in mind. Old pieces, try to kill them. And if it get feedback from multiple sources, and if there's not that many like pieces that are working right now, start over. Start over and like build a portfolio that can definitely present quality first. That's all I'm going to elaborate there. Open to questions on that. But second of all, clarity. I think this kind of passes over on what we're saying in terms of like presenting your work, like having a clean website or a clean portfolio. So I think I covered that. So the second segment of this is going to be art fundamentals. So there is definitely a pressure, especially now with all these like all the programs that are basically evolving at such a high speed right now, Substance Designer, Substance Painter, Houdini, all these programs, there's kind of a demand for like technical prowess. But I can't stress enough that even with all this technical evolution, it's so important that your art is still strong in terms of the foundations of it. So your final piece or your final image, show strength in using shapes and silhouettes, show strength in color, composition. Go back and review elements of composition for making an attractive image. And these are going to be, I have them written here because I forget them myself sometimes. This can be unity, balance, movement, rhythm, focus, contrast, pattern, and proportion. There is one book that is, I have it on my shelf right now. Hold on. I'm going to actually look this up real quick because that is pretty important. But I will definitely recommend this book for when you're setting up your final illustration, if you are doing an environment scene, or anything that has to do with maybe like concept art, composition, or anything. It's this book over here. Picture This by Molly Bang. It's a very basic, simple book to read through, but she just like puts the elements of composition in such a simple way that I think it's always good to have like on the side of your desk for when your picture is getting a little too complex, or when your final image is getting a little like you're not getting that final result or that final read. People are getting confused when they see it or don't know what it's about. Being able to go back to the basics and look at it objectively is important. And another thing that I would recommend, a lot of great examples for art are going to come obviously from master painters. So on my packet, I'm going to send out a good amount of like references that you can check, but artists from the Hudson River School, and then plein air painters, master plein air painters, definitely look them up and see what they've done right. If you can find breakdowns of that, or if you can study that to see how they worked with their shapes or color harmonies, composition, make sure that there is still an understanding of the foundations of art in your portfolio. Not just technical prowess, not just that you can do zebras, that you can do substance. Make sure that there's still like mastery of those fundamentals in art. And a second section on this is going to be, I'm going to pass over to technical understanding. This may be one that people can be fairly like understanding of it, but at the same time, when you're making art, it could be lost in context of the fact that what you're doing needs to go into an engine and it needs to run. So first thing for environment artists, especially for architecture pieces or hard surface modelers, if you are doing interior pieces or building pieces, modularity and reusability. It's going to be vital that you learn to reuse everything that you make in your art. So trim textures, modular wall pieces, floor pieces, deco pieces. Find creative ways of finding multi-use to different things. Can a pillar be a bench? Can a pillar be can a window be like a door opening? Like, can you switch out a piece and turn it into something that still makes sense but is reusable? Because most of these models you're going to be making for a team, they all need to work pretty quickly. Like, someone can't be like adjusting the pivot on it and kind of trying to make sure if it snaps together. Things need to snap immediately, snap to a certain metric. And the more multi-use something can have, the better, because the more single-use something gets, the more expensive it is, and the more pointless it is to kind of have it, unless it's a hero piece, unless it's like a hero prop or part of a specific scene. Everything should be used multiple times, no exception. The second point is going to be optimizations. So can your model or material or VFX be used in game and not cause like a frame rate crash? If you're doing foliage, can you optimize that foliage so that there's not that much overlapping of cards, or that there's as simple geometry as possible, especially with foliage, that those are assets that tend to get used multiple times. And even with LODs, they are one of the hardest points in terms of when you're going through an optimization path in an environment. It's usually one of the things that's going to kill frame rate, along with maybe some texture size that you might need to go through optimization. So texture size, what I mean is more, don't use a 4K map for like a backpack, or like a small asset that's going to be in an environment, for like an atlas of leaves, maybe, not really, honestly. Unless it's like kind of cinematic, you can always get away with 512, 1028, even 256, yes. So try to also keep in mind texture size and also UV usage. Make sure you're using all your UV space for that. That falls under optimization as well. So the other thing that's going to be LODs. As an artist, sometimes you will need to you will need to make LODs for your assets most of the time. So even if you're not doing them, it's still really kind of beneficial for you to understand this kind of technical process of how your asset is going to go down the pipeline and how it's going to affect other people. So making sure that you can make LODs for your assets and integrate those into your into a game engine. You can adjust them to a good speed and see that they don't pop too much. If that makes sense. Is another part that if you can show these things to a recruiter, know that you have the technical understanding, show in your portfolio that you have the technical understanding but have the art fundamentals down to a solid, and it's all shown with clarity, I think it's one of the, placed simply, it's one of the strongest points that you can do. That's mostly what I really would cover. I did want to see if you guys had any specific questions, so I could kind of funnel this, because I know it's a little general, and hopefully I can elaborate this a little bit more with the info packet I sent out. But okay, so elaborating on events and networking. So for my route, really what I did, I tried to start early. I think that's what helped me. GDC was kind of the biggest thing that helped me. And I think the big part of it is I went in without not really kind of, it wasn't with the goal of getting a job. It was more like I was genuinely curious, and I wanted to understand like what people's roles were, what people struggled with in a pipeline or in like a production. And what basically how I as like a developing like game developer or a game artist could create my skills so that I can alleviate as much pain as possible in the pipeline development. So the only big event I go was GDC really. But I think the vital part, yeah, if you can do the volunteer event, that is amazing, because the volunteer community is such a welcoming but also so capable and so knowledgeable community. It's incredible, just the amount of the combination of the warmth and also just mastery that you can find in that community is just absolutely just important and unique. So I would say apply to the GDC volunteer event. With that volunteer, if you get through, they give you a full conference pass. You're going to be working, but you at least get the full conference pass and food tickets for the whole week. You get some events at the end of the night, and I can't stress it enough that please make the most out of those events, make the most out of knowing people, because they may not, how do I say this, like, just make friends with everyone, not just the people who have the shiny titles or work in the shiny company, because you never know who's going to go where. I've had so many experiences with people that we became really great friends, and then now they're like going into like really big projects. And I mean, it's just something that's exciting for you to see because it challenges you too. But just be a genuine person on that, and be seeking out to make friends. And I think the doors will open beyond that. Obviously, there are opportunities for interviews in GDC, but again, a matter of how you talk to people. Well, actually, funny story. One event that I usually went to, and that I would recommend going in GDC, it's called the Art Directors Roundtable. And that's as it sounds. It's a lot of art directors. They come over, they sit, and they basically discuss what their hardest like issues have been during production, and kind of compare and contrast between each other. That was the first roundtable that I was going to consistently since I was in sophomore year, and I could not recommend it enough. It was probably the most eye-opening talk in terms of getting to understand the reality, how a company actually works or how a studio actually works compared to like a studio, like a school environment. And in that talk, I think it was 2 years ago, there was this art director that he was from Guerrilla Games. And after that, you get to talk around with people, and I approached them and I was like, hey, I'm a big fan of Horizon Zero Dawn. Like, thank you so much for sharing what you did. And he had mentioned something about outsourcing in that talk, and that's when I bring up. I know that you mentioned outsourcing in your talk and what we were discussing. I just wanted to ask how your approach was in your production compared to us, because this is my background. I've done outsourcing, and his eyes like lit up, and he's like, "Oh, you do outsourcing? Like, that's amazing." I ended up having a 1-hour talk with this art director, which opened up to just an interview, to being able to apply to what was a outsourcing reviewer, but also like an art direction position at Guerrilla Games. Now at that time, I wasn't able to follow through on that because I just can't move over to Guerrilla Games. And it was more of a timing conflict. But that's one way that things can kind of come together in like just a conference area. So sorry, I kind of rambled on that, but I hope you kind of get a gist of what I mean of the importance of going to these events. For me, I recommend GDC, but there may be a plethora of other ones, small or big. I just be a genuine person, be genuinely curious, and come in with an open mind, ready to learn and ready to listen, because people are really going to appreciate that, and people are going to appreciate when you show willingness to listen. to them. Gabriel, you had a question on what my experience was like working on Spider-Man PS4. It was really cool. I mean, I didn't know what I was being hired for when I first came into Insomniac, and that's when they were like, "Oh, we're working on Spider-Man," and it was pretty cool for me. I will admit I'm not a huge comic book nerd, but in terms of like the scope and the development of it, and just like being able to play test this, I was like, this is great. Like it's crazy that the swinging mechanic, just like the God of War axe throwing mechanic, those mechanics take like 3 years to kind of polish up. That's kind of the time it took them to polish up those swinging mechanics, and even still, the traversal was always something that was being polished constantly, even until the end of the game. So in terms of my experience there, it was yeah. I need more specific. Do you have more specific like requests? I'm gonna ramble on this, but if you have any specific areas of it, please let me know. So I would kind of cross in between like outsourcing and open world set dressing and traversal optimization. So kind of just checking different areas to make sure that Spider-Man wasn't even stuck in it. Spider-Man could traverse through areas, making sure that collision was traversable, and different other traversal like checkpoints and checkmarks that we needed to cross over. So I also had the opportunity of making, it was Puerto Rican storefronts for I think it was the upper area of New York, but unfortunately when I left, I guess they didn't have clearance to use the Puerto Rican flag, so all those Puerto Rican flags were changed to Cuban flags. And I saw that, I think it was a year after, and my heart wept a little because I was so ready for all those Puerto Rican flags to be there, and like the little like, I think there was even like Boricua and some of the, there's definitely like Puerto Rican like storefronts, like there's words that are definitely Puerto Rican, but there's a Cuban flag on it, and it was just a matter of a copyright. Sometimes Sony doesn't have clearance to use certain flags. I don't know why, but yeah, that was one part. And that was also an interesting thing, like in the general experience of outsourcing and environment art, how much copyright can go into one thing is very important. So like even the smallest things need to go through like clearance with copyright. So if a design or a font is too similar, like every font for every storefront needed to be checked. Like items, when we would send them out to outsourcing and we would like gather up like a prompt or a list of designs for it, you couldn't like make it too close to like a existing prompt. So it's kind of just always kind of dodging the bullet of being like, oh, you copied this design, It's like, no, not really. It's like a mixture of all these designs, but so long as it doesn't look the same as one thing, then you're kind of in the clear. But still always, it's way more complex than I would have thought, or I would have ever given it credit. So yeah, it's just a lot of things that you'd think on the back end. It's like, oh, why didn't they fix it? So what was interesting about Insomniac is that it is like a AAA studio, but it still feels kind of like Friends in a Garage kind of feel. Like it's still kind of indie, the vibe of it. So I think what definitely comes in is like, obviously there needs to be a lot of discussion between departments for clearance on things. You can't just do things on a whim. It needs to be discussed with design, with traversal, with animation, with art. So it's a lot of talks, a lot of meetings. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. It gets a little bit more complex and a little bureaucratic. But in terms of scope, I think crunch happens, but like you have a lot of other people that you kind of do crunch with, and there's more help to kind of push like a heavier weight. So if there's a huge deadline coming up, So long as you have a lead that's good in that, like, dividing the task, divide and conquer, that just becomes a little bit more easier and accessible, and there's more chances of you to help out on that. The other question was what to have in your portfolio or how to best set it up. It really depends on what you're gonna do, on what you're going for as a career, especially now that there's this trend of specializing, obviously, in the art field too. So if you want to be like a material artist, having your latest substance designer materials, substance painter, having them in an environment, like not just like the preview globe, but also have them in context so that people can see how it looks like in an environment or in game. If you kind of want to lean into more of a technical artist and you want to show like how you built it, then show your designer graphs. That's good. If you are leaning to be more of a lighter, make sure that you have your scenes that are like your lit scenes. I don't know much on that, but know the technical aspect of it. Like, don't make a scene that's not going to run. Make sure that you're always working in context of a game or a game engine, or knowing how that is going to affect like a real-time game or a real-time experience. So how does Insomniac organize their employees to do tasks for a game? Well, it depends. Obviously, like, there are things I can't disclose due to NDA. But the general idea is you have a task manager, you have project managers, and you have your art leads, you have your lead artists, senior artists, so on and so forth. So there's a different like hierarchy of positions, and depending on what is needed to be done for the major deadline, that gets communicated down from project managers to obviously art directors and senior artists, and gets divvied out to each team. I can only speak for like what the art team, but you'll have like conferences or you'll have meetings of your team, obviously, like weekly or weekly or like 2 times a week, to discuss what the goals are, what everyone's going to be doing, and what needs to be done by what time, what needs to be submitted. And that's kind of how it goes, really. So I think that's kind of the general idea. So it's kind of like, yeah, like a smaller studio, but like with more divisions, and you have stakeholders and you have people who are going to be involved in the feedback process of it. So things can change depending on what another person requests. Same with like here in Lightstorm, like if it's a little bit more quicker, but say James doesn't like something in a scene, that probably is going to be communicated fairly quickly and go down into the production. Sometimes people are going to have to stay late that day or that week. But yeah, it all varies on what the deadlines are for that. So I think that's all the questions really that we have for now. Thank you all so much for giving me this opportunity to chat with you guys. And I hope you got something out of this. I don't really use Facebook that much, but if you ever have a question, feel free to like send me a message over there or leave a message here, and I'll send out an info packet possibly on Sunday with more of the portfolio info and just references that you can use from that. So thank you so much, guys. Hope you have an awesome rest of the day. Bye.